Hi everyone, this is me, and today we're going to talk about this stack of books, which are the books I read or started to read in October. So this is me. I'm just going to start yapping about them, and we'll go from there afterwards. So I completed 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then the one book from the library, so 6 books this month, and I started reading two. Oh, I forgot to pick up the other one. It's back there, but I will tell you about it in a second. That I haven't finished. So I'm going to talk about the book, and then at the end we're going to update the English Bookshop 2025 reading challenge list, because I'm trying to complete it by the end of the year, and as you can see, it's not going very well. Very well, because I started it like mid-October. So we're going to start with Perfume. So this was the first book I completed. I had read most of this in September, but I technically finished it on October 1st. So we're going to talk about it now. Let's hope my thoughts are as clear as they were when I finished it. So first things first, I absolutely adored this book. Adored isn't the right word. I thought it was a really good book. Okay, so my camera decided to give up on me. Maybe I will, yeah. Okay, so you don't see the pack of stuff under my desk, which is my crafting supplies that I haven't started using yet. But anyway, so I was saying, yeah, adored isn't the right word, because I think I loved it, but given the content of this book, it sounds weird to say it like that, but it was an excellent book, absolutely written extremely well, if you ask me. So yeah, let's talk about that a bit more. So this is Perfume by Patrick Suskind. This is the Penguin Essentials editions and was published in 1986, I think, and it's translated from German. So this is, well, technically it's Perfume, the story of a murderer. So this is a book that takes place in 17th century France, and it follows Granville, who is our main character, and it's told from a third-person perspective, if I remember correctly, but it is always from the perspective of Granville, not third-person narrator. So based on what the blurb says, so I don't give much away. There isn't much away to give, but Granville is a Parisian slum, and is born in a Parisian slum and abandoned on the streets. So then I think he's taken to an orphanage, and he like moves around a lot in sort of very hard working conditions, and he survives a lot of diseases common in the time. He is depicted as someone who is slow isn't the right word. He's depicted as someone who's not, let's say, the brightest. What is the phrase? The brightest something in the box. I don't remember. But he's depicted as someone who's not very bright. He's also depicted as someone who's ugly, and someone people don't pay attention to, and things like that. So really, he's a character of the underworld, and one who is often overlooked, and often atrocities are committed against him. But what happens is that it says it at the back that he does turn into a murderer. But the other main theme of this book, which I thought was fascinating, is that he has this extraordinary ability of smell. So he can smell every single thing that normal, let's say, humans or people without this sense of smell can smell. And he stores these scents in his brain, like he remembers them. And I'm talking about the tiniest thing, like this page of the book, for example, might have a different scent than this page of the book. Like those kind of tiny details, which I really liked. I thought it gave a fresh perspective of following this character, because he describes it gave a fresh perspective of looking at the world, because he describes a lot of things based on smell, because that is his primary sense. Like, he doesn't see things, he smells things. I mean, he is capable of sight, but my point is that things are described in a way where he smells things and not necessarily sees them. So it's basically we're taking through his whole life throughout this book, and his sort of conquest to find the perfect scent and concoct the perfect perfume with those perfect scents. Even though he's the only one that can kind of smell it, but he uses these perfumes to elicit feelings and reactions in people. So I'm also partial to a bit of scientific information. Yeah. And there are quite a few chapters where it's described how Granville is a perfume apprentice and he learns how to make perfumes in this business and so forth. And it goes into the science of perfume making and a little bit of the business aspect of it, and I like it. But those parts are also used as critiques of the economy and the privileged and so forth in this book. So the other thing is that it's a tiny book. It's like 200 pages, and it's like not a proper, it's a small, let me show you for comparison. Like, this is a standard paperback. Like, see, it's small. But the amount of topics it criticizes and covers in this book is insane. And it does it in a way that you don't feel that it's doing too much. And I think that's the key of why I like this book to that extent, is that because it is concise and it is very small, but it covers such a breadth of topics that you feel sort of in depth that these are covered, and always through a fictional perspective. And there's a lot of, I think, critique. So basically, I'm not joking, this book talks about everything, and I mean everything you can think of that is wrong with humanity. But it also does it in a bit of a comical sense, and I like that, like a witty humor that catches you a bit off guard. Not like, laugh on the floor humor, but the kind of humor that you just smirk a little bit when you read it. But I will say that the other part why this book I think is so good, it is disturbing, like extremely disturbing. And it's disturbing in a way that it catches you off guard. Like, you start reading, you're like, okay, this is, I see. And then you're like, I don't know, had some, like, I don't know, chapter 10 or something, you're like, oh my gosh, you put it down and you realize, okay, that was like, what did I just read? It's extremely disturbing, but in a way that catches you off guard. And it's more, I would say, psychological disturbance, or not, I don't know, social psychological disturbance rather than gore. So I think that's why it helps with catching you off guard. But the way this book makes you think and makes you feel is why I think it's so expertly written. So I mean, it could also be the translator. I mean, I should give props to the translator, actually. I don't know who translated this book. Translated by John E. Woods. But I honestly think this is excellent. Do check the trigger warnings in advance, because I'm serious in that it talks about every single thing that is wrong with humanity. So anyway, basically the point of the story is exploring this guy's life and his conquest for finding the perfect scent combination and the perfect source materials for these scents. And he figures out that, I mean, this is on the blurb, the perfect scent is innocence, and combine that with the fact that we know he's a murderer, you get the the idea. So I honestly would recommend it. I find this also a much more horrific book to read during Halloween season or whatever, if you want to read something spooky, than something with ghosts and I don't know, whatever. It's just, I think it's so disturbing because the stuff that are addressed are things that happen in the real world that we live in. So having the way it's written and having them all thrown together at you in here really works. And also the fact that it's set in the 17th century makes you kind of feel that you're so detached from that, that things are different now because it's 300 years later. But then you realize, no, this could have very well been taking place today. So yeah, I think it managed to accomplish a lot of things in a very short amount of time, in a very short and succinct way. Also, as you can see, this book's been through it. It was in the airport, it was in 3 different countries, well, yeah, 3 different countries, squished in airport bags, and it took me a while to get through because it is so disturbing, catches you off guard. Like, I couldn't sit through and read this in one sitting, even though it's so short, just because I had to take a break. But I do think it's worth the read. It is really well crafted. Okay, I don't know how rambling that was. It's been a while since I've read it. I think I might need to start filming these after I finish reading them and then just editing it all together at the end. But yeah, so great book. Okay, so that's one. Then, okay, these aren't really in order, but in order of when I read them, but we're just going for it. So then I read The Black Tongue Thief by Christopher Buehlman. And yeah, this is a adventure fantasy sort of thing. So we follow Kinch, who meets this so Kinch is a thief, and he is a thief by training, which I will get to in a second because I really like that aspect of the story. He's a thief by training, and he's ordered by his organization to follow this warrior from a different country to her final destination. And he agrees to this because he's in huge debt to this organization because they charged him for his training. And then he meets Gilda, which is the warrior, and they go on this adventure and pick up people along the way, and things happen as they go through this world to the country. So it is quite expansive because they move from, there's a gorgeous map. They move from up here in Holt, and they go all the way, well, I think technically they go through the sea, but they kind of go like this through the sea to Outscrim. But they have, some detours, so they kind of go through most of these countries. But it's really good. So then, yeah, so that's the gist of it. They go on an adventure. This is set in an adventure. I see, the thing is, it does say on the back what the adventure is, but I didn't know going into it because I didn't read the back in that much detail, and I think I got more out of it that way. So all I'm gonna say is that both of them have different motivations in conducting his trip, and throughout the trip these might change based on influences and encounters they have. So yeah, so I will say that this is set in, well, it's set in a not our world, but it is very reminiscent of our world in that I see there's influences in countries like Ispanthia. I'm pretty sure is to some degree influenced by Spain because they have olive oil and wine there, and it's like the warmer countries and so forth. And then you have some countries which I feel are influenced by Eastern Europe and things like that. And the way I read it, given the guilds and everything, I feel like it's set in a medieval area, medieval centuries. And the year in this book is 1244, but they don't calculate time the same way we do in our world. So but I do think it is meant to be set in that sort of era because you have taverns. Okay, you have taverns everywhere, but the way the political system is set up and the fact that you have all these guilds to which that are in charge of different aspects. So you have, you have the weird ones here. So you have the Guild of Thieves, you have the Magicers, but then you also have the Guild of, I don't know, the fishermen, jeez, and so forth. And that I think is something that, at least from what I know off the top of my head, at least in Europe, was something that happened kind of in the Middle Ages in 1300s. So I get that approximation here. So yeah, now what I like about this book is that I don't think the plot is anything groundbreaking, but I do like the character interactions and the character development, and I do like the world setting. At the beginning, I thought the world setting, I was okay. I was just been reading a lot of the same world settings in fantasy books, so it's probably not necessarily a critique of this book, but just in general, that even though it's a fantastical world, it's not that different from our own. Which, I mean, it is the point, it's like to detach yourself a little bit from our world and see things that happen in our world reflected in this other world, and then you have maybe a more objective view to certain topics. But I also feel like I want to read a book that has a fantastical world that is so drastically different from our own, it's almost incomprehensible. And I don't know if such a book exists. So if you know of one, please let me know because I'd love to read it. I don't know, something crazy. Like every character is some sort of plant and there's a plant lord or something, and we see the whole society built on how plants think. I don't know, something insane, okay? Like out of the box. But anyway, but I really liked the writing for this. I never felt a dull moment. Like there was never a time where I'm bored, okay, I need to put this down. There was always something going on. I was curious to see what the next thing to happen would be. There were some elements that took me by surprise, which is also good to see in writing like this. And another thing is I really liked the humor. So it did take me a few chapters to really get into it because the humor is so we're in the underworld of this medieval city. So you can understand that the humor would be a little like dirty, a little gritty, like kind of like that. But once I got used to it, I really enjoyed it because there's this fine line of sarcasm and like dark humor, and I think to be able to do humor well, you have to be able to toe the line between what is acceptable and funny and then what crosses that line and is just like not funny and offensive and this person should be jailed or something. And I think it's a very thin line to hold, especially in a book that's set in medieval time and then is told from the perspective of a male character. But I think it was excellently done because even when you had references to when you had jokes of, let's say, a sexual nature, they were I never felt that they, although they were like dark and dirty and gritty, I never felt that they were derogatory towards women or anyone else. So I like props to the author for that, and it was good. And also, and while we're on the topic, any references of sexual intercourse was also approached with a way that, again, wasn't derogatory, even though it was not, let's say, I don't know what the word for it is. It like towed a thin line. So it wasn't derogatory and it wasn't like really explicit, but you still understood what was happening and the overall atmosphere related to a specific sexual encounter, which isn't always the case in books like these, I would say, so that's great. And the humor here, it really catches you by surprise, because you're reading it, and then it's the character, so it's narrated through Kinch's point of view, and I think it's first person, narration. And like he makes these statements offhand that completely catch you off guard. So it like creeps up on you, the humor and the humor in this book, but also how much you start to like the character. Another thing with the main character is that he is a thief, and which has its moral implications, and he fully acknowledges that he is a thief and the moral, and that's the thing that I like. He is very self-aware. He fully acknowledges that he's a thief and it's not, the most moral calling, but he also compares it, but he's also quick to, he's quick, how do I explain this? He judges other people for their morality, but he also does the same to himself. So it feels like he has a very good understanding of who he is and what he's doing. There's a word for it in Greek that will work well here, but I cannot think of an equivalent in English, so we're just going with it. And I do like the fact that the thievery in this is seen as an art form and not as some sort of mean criminal malicious type vibe, which I also appreciate. And then Galva, who's the other character, I really liked her. I really want to read some stuff from her perspective, and I just found out yesterday when I was looking this up to see if there's a continuation in the series, that there's a prequel, and it is from Galva's perspective. So it's not during this adventures before she meets Kinch, obviously, but still, I would be very interested in reading that. But Galva is this fierce warrior type that's really dedicated to her sword and to her, let's say, the goddess she's sort of dedicated her life to, which is the goddess of death. And she has this also very matter-of-fact way of speaking that when it interacts with Kinch, like, I don't know, I really like their relationship, and that just adds more to the humor. Like, they're not afraid, I like the friendship. They're not afraid to call each other out and to banter and so forth without any romantic undertones, must I say, which is quite refreshing. There is a romantic interest between Kinch and this other member they pick up during their travels, but I won't talk too much about it. It's not the main source of the story. I will say she does influence his character development and his growth as a person, but I don't really want to go much into that without betraying the plot. And it's a cute, side plot. It's not the main point of the story, but there's some nice moments and some interesting I wouldn't say like this isn't a romance. There is this romantic line, but it's not predominant. So don't go into this thinking you're reading a romance. So I don't know what much else to say about this. Okay, the one sort of critique, it's not really a critique, it's just something that stood out to me, is that the chapters always end in the same, or if not always, like 90% of the time, they end in the same way, where something happens and the main character makes a statement, and then the chapter stops. And it's a statement that, it's sort of a cliffhanger that you want to read forward, but I feel like it's the same style of writing used for every chapter, which in one sense it's good because there's consistency, but in the other I felt like sort of, okay, let's move on, try something different at some point. This is me being very picky, but but what I mean by that is they're like, okay, we made it to this island and we went to sleep, and then he's like, and that's when I don't know what to say. That's when the dragons descended. There aren't any dragons in this story. I'm just saying in general, so I'm just trying to think of something random. I'm not explaining this correctly, but then that's what happens every single chapter. Okay, I just realized my phone is giving me only 35 minutes for video. Is my storage getting full, or is it the battery? I don't know. Well, we'll see. So anyway, there's that solid read. I will read The Daughter's War, which is a prequel. All of the other Christopher Buehlman books that I've seen are horror, so I wouldn't necessarily read those, but I would read anything from this series. And he does reference Joe Abercrombie and Brandon Sanderson, I think, and J.R.R. Tolkien or something in his acknowledgements. And I've never read any of those books, so I can't tell you definitively, but I get the impression that this is kind of similar, or at least has the same ambiance as those authors. Okay, so then this was, maybe actually I should tell you. Let me think. Okay, no, let's go. Oh, geez. Okay, so then this is A Fellowship of Bakers and Magic by Jay Penner. This is a cozy fantasy that I was just really in a mood to read something nice and light, because I had just read Perfume and then a horror book, and I just needed a break, and I didn't want to read a contemporary romance. So I picked this up. It looked cute. I primarily picked it up because it featured a baking competition, and I love those types of things. Like, and also the main character is the underdog in this competition, and that's just like right up my alley. So I didn't expect many things from this book. I just wanted it to be a fun time, and it was. I do have some criticisms of it, and I wouldn't say it's a masterpiece of any sort. I've read better books in this genre, I think, but it did what I needed it to do. But I will tell you what my criticisms are, and if yeah, we'll go from there. So, I would have liked but this is a personal preference. I would have liked more baking information and more competition scenes than what we were given. But I did like the found family aspect. It was cute. I liked the world. It was also cute. And I know there's a few more books in this world where we follow different other characters. I don't know if I'll read those yet. That's still under consideration. But it was cute, and this cover is very nice. And there's also a map, which I did not expect in a cozy fantasy. Like, look at that. So, oh, what I forgot to say about this one, sorry, I'm backtracking, is what I really liked, in addition to the map, it has the calendar system. So it has the way they keep track of the months and the days, and by extension, the weeks, which I thought was cool. So yeah, anyway, back to this now. The other criticism, and there is a love story in here. And I am not particularly a fan. It felt very instant. Like they didn't really know who they were like they didn't know anything about each other than the fact that they felt this sort of attraction, and that I don't know how to say this without spoiling it. Yeah. So they have this sort of attraction, and there's this like lore that they were sort of meant to be together. I don't know how else to phrase that without spoiling it. And it just felt like they were together because this main character was the first time someone saw her in that way, A, and B, because they had this quote unquote prophecy. That's not really a prophecy, but whatever, that said they would have to be together. Not they would have to be together, that they're like, supposed to be together. And it just felt very like out of nowhere. Like they spent 2 days together and they decided that they were gonna like spend the rest of their lives together. I'm like, come on. Like, what is this? And I felt the same way about the friendships. Like, the friendships were cute, and I can understand that this happens, but literally there was this group of friends. They all decided in the scope of the competition, which was a week long, that they were like now best friends. And that not only that, but the two of them were moved across this world to move to the city where the main character is from, so they could be together. It wasn't phrased in a like be together. They also did it for their own personal reasons, but it seemed a bit unrealistic. So all these people moved over to this little town just so that you could have continuations of the series in that town. Yeah. Okay. And there's also this struggle of otherness because the main character, is the only person in the competition who doesn't have magic. So there's this like whole thing, oh, I don't deserve to be here because I don't have magic and blah, 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 blah. And it was just so repetitive and just kept going in circles. And I'm like, okay, let's move on. But I mean, at the end of the day, it was fun time. The book did what I needed it to do. So I really think I have to be in a very specific mindset to read this without wanting to throw it out the window. But I've read worse, so there's that. Then we have Scuttler's Cove by Nick Cutter. No, not Nick Cutter, what am I saying? David Barnett. So this is a folklore horror type thing, and I did film myself talking about it for like 20 minutes right after I read it, so I think I'm just going to insert that clip here, so I'm sorry if it's patchy. I just think that I probably explain things a lot better than what I would do if I did it now, because I had already talked to myself, like to the wall, for half an hour about this book after I read it. And then I did the filming, so I feel like the information is out of my head. It's left my soul. So yeah, I also talk to myself usually about these other books so I can process them, but I hadn't filmed them already. So yeah, anyway. So there was that one. So this is Cutler's Cove by David Barnett, and it is a horror book. However, that's kind of all I knew, that it's a horror book and that is also um, based on it's folklore horror. So it's based on it's not based on stories, but it does include folklore elements in the sense that there's deity, well, actually, okay, it does include folklore elements. That's all I knew going into this, and the fact that it's set in a seaside town in Cornwall, so in the UK. That's a very small town that's being overrun, or not overrun, well, so kind of overrun by rich second homers and tourists. And I did get the impression before going into this that it would be a bit of a locals versus incomers kind of situation. So yeah, I tried to go into this with as little information as I can, only because it's a horror book. So now I will talk about this in more detail. So we follow our main character, who is Marin Moon, who moves back to Scutler's Cove, which is this town that she is originally from, but she moved away when she started university and hasn't been back in 13 years. So she has to go back after her mother dies. And then she encounters weird stuff, is the gist of it. So what I will say about this book is that I think it's a solid book. It's not personally a genre that I tend to read a lot, so I'm not sure how good of a judge I can be objectively speaking, but I did enjoy it. I don't think this is something that I would pick up. I think for me to pick up something similar to this again, it would have to be something it would probably be a rare occasion. At least that's what I thought until I finished this book. But the book itself, I do think the pacing was good. Like, I never felt bored when I was reading it. It was entertaining. It's just that horror, I honestly, I really don't care. I really don't care. Like, I'd rather read a mystery or something of the sort than horror, because at least most of it doesn't do anything for me. It's not this book's fault. I just mean the genre as a whole, really. Especially in book form. Just because I think I would have to be completely engrossed in this vibe, feely sort of horror-y situation. Oh, what an excellent string of words. Anyway, and I think that's more achieved better with visuals and music and so forth. So I do think this would make an excellent movie. But yeah, anyway, so the thing is, I think what I really enjoyed is that it does have the folklore element, and I do really like reading things like that. So I enjoyed it in that sense, but it's not these types of books. I think the problem for me is that most of the time, at least the ones I've read, they're not necessarily character driven. Like, you don't get to know much about the character than just what is necessary for the plot to continue. And I like to get a more in-depth approach to that. Now, if I'd rather read a mystery novel that's like a crime novel where I don't get in-depth information on the characters, but I feel more entertained by such a storyline than a horror storyline like this. There is a sort of mystery element to it, but it's not necessarily in solving a crime. It's just figuring out what's going on, sort of. But you kind of, I wouldn't say you could guess explicitly what's going on, but there are little hints and clues and things going and references that I guess make more sense once you actually get to the revelation, because now I'm speaking in hindsight, so I don't know if I actually guessed the plot or if I just feel like it made sense. But the good thing is, what I liked about this book is that things made sense. There wasn't something completely the twist or the revelations or whatever you want to call it. It wasn't something completely outrageous that came out of nowhere that had no foreshadowing or no, like it made sense. It made sense that it was there. So in that regard, that's why I also think this is also this cover. Okay, I'm getting sidetracked, but this cover is, I don't know why, but I love it because it's the crab, but it's made out of like corals. It's fantastic. So yeah, I will say, because you get sort of there is a bit of a two timeline situation. It's not very heavy. You just get a few, I wouldn't call them flashbacks because they're from the perspective of different characters that are no longer alive, but it's very few chapters and it's not confusing to me. It made sense why they did that, and it added to the story. I think it didn't subtract from it. So I did like it. So it is there is multiple perspectives, but all of the perspectives are written still in the third person. So if you go to this chapter, it's from the perspective of this character, but it's written the narrator is still in the third person. But it worked. I could tell when the perspective switched. Like I could tell, okay, this is this character and so forth. And I enjoyed it. I do think the story was told well. I just think the genre is not something I'm dying to read. Like if it shows up in front of me, I'll read it, but it's not something that is of particular entertainment for me. Having said that, this freaking book ended on it's not on a cliffhanger, but it ended on in a way that hinted that the story would potentially be continued, or if not continued, be referenced in another book that's set within the same universe. And now I kind of want to read that. So this is the second. Then I figured this is the second book by the author, at least the second horror book by this author, and the first one called Withered Hill, which also I love these covers, by the way, because this is a hare, but it's made out of branches. It's fantastic. But anyway, this is Withered Hill was also referenced at the end of this book. So now I'm like, okay, now I have to go back and read this and then also read the third one that's coming out in March. So I just said I don't really want to read books of these sort, but I will read those two books now because I'm immersed. If there's books set in the same universe, even if they're sort of standalones, I'm always more likely to read them, even if I didn't absolutely love the first book I read, let's say. So yeah, I do intend to read the other two eventually. I'm not in a rush. I probably won't get to them until next year. I'll probably wait until the new one is out to even buy, or well, I might buy this one, but I'll wait until the new one is out to read it maybe. But yeah. So it's a solid book, and I don't think it's not one that's all over the internet. So I would recommend you give it a go if you are someone who's interested in the genre. And even if you're not interested in the genre, I think this might be a good entry point because it's not overly gory. The storytelling I do think is on point, and I personally do like the folklore elements, and I think part of that is because I don't like reading thrillers set in the modern setting. Like if I'm gonna read a horror or a thriller, I tend to go more gothic era. So something like Laura Purcell, she writes a lot of gothic stuff. I read a lot of gothic things earlier this year. Something that's set in a world pre-technology. Don't ask me why. I don't know. I just think that the vibes of that era, or let's say not necessarily the vibes, but the atmosphere that's just given by the era the book is set in, where there was, less scientific knowledge, there was less information available to everyone, less technology, more rural settings. It was harder to travel or connect to people. I just feel that adds an extra layer in itself to a horror book, at least in my mind. So I do like to read not a lot, but I do gravitate towards gothic stuff over modern stuff. So I think this is a good in between because you get the folklore elements, but you still get a modern setting. So I did like that aspect. Oh, I will say, this review is so all over the place. Um, there were a few chapters of from the perspective, so I'm trying to not give any spoilers. So from the perspective of one of the non-human entities in this story, I think there was only one. And I would have loved to have a few more of those chapters from either from the same or from a different non-human entity, because I do think it added to the story, and I did like the perspective and the way the atmosphere given by that chapter. I think added both weight and added more of a horror, not I don't know. I just really like that one chapter and I wish there was more of it. Having said that, I don't know how the author could have really integrated more of it, at least in the first half of the book, without giving too much away about what the revelations, plot, developments were going to be. But I would have liked at the end to have also a point of view from the other non-deity. Um, I think partially, okay, I've been talking about this for like 11 minutes after I said I have nothing else to say. I will say that so there's a group of locals and a group of non-locals, as I expected there to be, and the non-locals, rich, high class, high society people do come off as very, very annoying. I was so irritated every time I had to read about them, but I'm pretty sure that's the point of it. But at some point I was like so over it. So that I was, yeah, I was so over it. But I will say that just when I reached the point of being over it, the chapter would end and the perspective would flip, and I would like settle back into the nice parts, the ones I found not so annoying, let's say. So I do think that was expertly crafted. Another thing to say is props to this author, because when I see a male author portraying women and like small inequalities they face even in today's era relatively accurately, I will give them that recognition, and this book achieved that. I can't say much more about it without revealing anything about the story, but yeah, props to the author. And so yeah, in conclusion, I will read the other two books in this universe. I don't know if I'm going to buy them or check them out from the library. That remains to be seen. But I will probably eventually get to them sometime next year. Because I don't really want to read a horror book after October, because I feel like we're getting more into winter, Christmas, cutesy feelings. And since I'm not even a horror reader to begin with, I just don't think it's going to happen before the end of the year. Even just to read this first one. And also I really want to read these 52 prompts, and that this one doesn't fit into any. So yeah, that was book one, solid read. I'm not gonna give it any ratings. I don't think I've talked about this really much yet, but I find the star rating system to be very subjective. It never has made sense to me, and I don't like to participate in it. I only do star ratings on the tracker apps if they force me to. But I just find I just find it so subjective, because I'm not gonna rate I'm not gonna rate a romance book with the same criteria that I'm gonna rate a fantasy book or a horror book or something else. And I might say I might really enjoy a book that was just super cheesy but not like expertly written or anything, and I don't think that book should have the same rating as a book that was beautifully written and that made me really think and consider. So anyway, I'm going down a tangent now, but I'm just gonna give you my thoughts and how much I like this book, how likely I am to continue the series or read another book by this author, or if I own the book, if I'm gonna keep it. I like to sit with that a bit, so I'm not gonna talk about it yet, but at some point I will be doing an unhaul, and I will mention there why I'm getting rid of it if I do get rid of it. Also, if it's a book from the library and I think I might buy it in the future to have at home. Those are more indicators to me of ratings than the actual. I don't know. Yeah, I'll give you as much information as I can. You can tell by me speaking about this for 15 minutes. And as much of my thoughts as I can, but I won't willingly give star ratings, at least not at this point in time, because I think for me to be to feel comfortable enough to do that, I would have to develop a very complex rating system, and like I'm not gonna do that. That takes all the joy out of reading for me. So I'm just gonna yap about them, and you can do with that information what you will. And then maybe I will turn these books around so you can see them. And then I read The October Man by Ben Aranovich. So this is the next book that was published. It's a novella in the Rivers of London series. It's really short. It wasn't anything different than what standard Rivers of London book. I've talked about these before, so just briefly. I do really like the premise. I like the writing of these books. It also has this sort of witty humor that I appreciate. And it's just a fun time. There's a bit of magic. There's a bit of mystery. It works. It is, as I said before, quite male-centered character-wise. And the first two books felt a bit like the author had no idea how to write women, or at least was over-sexualizing them a bit. But that problem improved exponentially as the series progressed. And now that I think about it, I think part of it was showing the development of our main character as he grew up from being, it's by no means an excuse, but he, becomes more mature and more grown up throughout this writing. So I don't know really what happened there, but yeah. But what I did like about this, and I didn't know it when I started it, is that it doesn't follow our normal characters. It goes to Germany. So usually the books are set in London, following the members of the London police force that tackled these supernatural crimes. But now we go back to Germany. And the other thing I should mention is that throughout the series, supposedly magic is kind of banned after World War II because it was a huge disaster. But then the British started to resurrect it a little bit because there was more supernatural things happening and they needed more than one person in this workforce. But then, in theory, other countries have also stopped. But we don't really know much about other countries in the world, one of the main ones being Germany, because they were such a big magic center during the war and like all the information they stored. And supposedly they had a bunch of information that was taken from the war. So this is reminiscent of what happened, in the human part of the war as well. A lot of information was supposedly destroyed because it wasn't ethically obtained and shouldn't be repeated and blah blah blah. Like supernatural information, but there's this uncertainty. Was it really destroyed? Anyway, I'm rambling now, but essentially now this book takes us to Germany and to the German equivalent of this London magic force. And it's a small novella, but it was interesting because there were references to the London world, and then there was some explanation of how the German system worked, and sort of little secrets they were keeping or whatever, or as much as you can accomplish within one novella. But it was fun. I don't know now if then the idea is that in the next couple books there'll be more interactions between the German and the London people. I don't know what the plan is. I haven't read the next book yet, even though it's back there. But from the synopsis, it doesn't seem like that's the case, at least for that one. So yeah, solid read. I would recommend this series, especially if you can get past the first and second book, only because of the way it approaches women a little bit. It's not horrible. Like I think it's passable. It's just sometimes it was a bit annoying. And then let's talk about this real quick. So then I read like 3 more chapters of The Mountain in the Sea by Ray Naylor. I don't know why this is taking me so long to read through. I've been reading this for over a month. Like, I just have no motivation to pick it up. But the plan is I'm going to take it with me on the train today when I go to Stockholm. So then I have 2 hours on the train to go there and come back, where I won't have anything else to do. So, like, this will be the least of greater evils or whatever. So it will force me maybe to finish it because I don't think it's a bad book. I don't know. I'm not in the mood for it. So yeah. And the other one I started reading is the one back there that says it's Once Upon a Tome. I read, I think, 35 pages. It's autobiographical nonfiction, and I didn't even realize that until I started reading it. So it took me by surprise, but I am enjoying it so far. But I will read that a bit more slowly than I usually read books because it is nonfiction. So I will finish that soon as well. And then the last book to talk about is The Poison Song, which hopefully editing me will insert on here. And that is the final installment of the Winnowing Flame trilogy, the Winnowing Flame trilogy by Jen Williams. And I took it from the library, that's why it's not here. But in short, I think it's an excellent conclusion, and I also think the series is fantastic. Okay, so The Poison Song. So the Winnowing Flame trilogy, the first book is called The Ninth Rain, the second one is The Bitter Twins, and the third one is The Winnowing Flame. The Poison Song. By the way, I love these titles. When you read the book and you realize what the titles are, I don't know, I liked I liked the connection. I am not sure if I've talked about this on YouTube yet. I think Bitter Twins must have been in my other wrap-up, but I will talk maybe more in detail now that the trilogy is done. So we're in a fantastical world, and it follows the sort of people that live on this Earth, let's call it. I don't really know if it's an Earth, but Earth. And then there's this sort of alien species that's been troubling them for, I'm pretty sure, centuries. Called the Jurelia. I'm not even sure, I don't know how these names are pronounced. Okay, we're just going with it. So it's basically, this trilogy is the unfolding of this war. But it also solves mysteries of the world we're in. So it uncovers big parts of this world's history. So in this series, you follow multiple different characters from different from different places in this world. And in the beginning, they're all in separate places, and then at some point, they all meet and come together. And you do get multiple perspectives, but always from the third person narrator. And it's not like the books that you have one chapter is one perspective and so forth. Like, it switches throughout, but it works, and I really enjoyed it because you have characters that are different ages, from different backgrounds, from different life experiences, and I feel they all give a fresh perspective to the story, and I also really like their characters in general. So the other wonderful thing about this series is that it uses a lot of the standard fantasy, not tropes, but fantasy elements, but it kind of uses them in a new way that you don't really realize that they're being used until, like, at some point it just clicks. So for example, there's elements of vampires, there's aliens, there's kind of elements of zombies, there's dragons, there's what else? There's witches, there's I am blanking now. There's like immortal sort of beings, which, okay, that's more the vampire approach. I don't know what else. Yeah, I don't know, but it just works. You have to trust me on this because I don't want to spoil anything, but it's fantastic. So then there's different. So what they're exploring is kind of like, okay, we're fighting these Jurelia people, but where did they come from? What do they want with us? How does this species work? Because there's also this sort of scientific historical perspective. So one of the main characters, she's, I think, on the more older side. The way she enters the story is that she is interested in finding the Jurelia artifacts from the past wars. So we're on the last final wars, I think, like the 9th one or something of the sort. So she's going back, and these wars have been happening for centuries on and off. So she's trying to find artifacts and figure out how these beings emerge, like their different sort of species, let's say, and things like that. So she has a sort of historical scientific perspective. And I really like that, especially in the first couple of books, because then the third one is more focused on the war and concluding these mysteries, but is much more focused on the actual war than the build up to it. And I also really like that from her. And then from a few other characters in later books, we also get journal entries or letter or parts of letters that give us some sort of background information. And I think it's a really good way to introduce this background information without it feeling like you're fed all this information at the same time. I don't know. I really liked how the writing style went and the blending of things and how everything kind of came together. Even though it's not especially the first book, is not that really fast-paced one. But I think it held a very good line between introducing you to this world and having some progression in the plot that could then be much more expanded on the second and third books once you're more familiar with this world we're in. So I think that was excellently achieved. So in addition to figuring out what the Jurelia are, is that then there's these species. I don't know if I should be calling them species, but the vampire-ish people that I mentioned earlier, the Eborans, are part of, they have Ebora, and traditionally in the past, they are the ones that fought off the Jurelia because they have these war beasts that are strong. Well, they're built for war. And they form a bond when they're born. They form a bond with traditionally an Eboran warrior. And these Eborans are not human. That's all we know at the beginning of the story. They're not human, and they tend to live. They have like red eyes, so you can tell they have a human form, but they have slightly small characteristics that can differentiate them from non-human, so people know they're Eboran. And then they have and they live for centuries. They're not immortal per se, but they live much longer than the human lifespan. So then the origin of these people is kind of explored in the books. So that's one. And that these are the people that are kind of like sort of like vampires. I'm not going to explain too much. They're not vampires by nature per se, but they do have vampirism elements that they kind of had to take on in response to challenges they faced. And yeah, it was not pretty. So there's those people. And then we also have the Fell Witches. And the Fell Witches are always women that have that somehow at some point during their life, usually when they're younger, they start developing this particular skill in which they can extract the life force from something and then turn it into this green flame. And that's why they're sort of witches. And they're seen as like evil and, warnings from God or whatever. And they have to be taken out of society. So they're taken by this place called the Winnowi, I think. Winnowi, I'm not sure how to pronounce it, where they kept in a sort of prison, and then of course they're taking advantage of in various different ways and so forth. So one of the main characters in our book, so the witch, quote unquote witch one, she escapes from this prison, and then we follow her from there on. So we have then that character, we have the scientist character who is human, let's say, like normal human, whatever. And then you have a few Eboran characters, and then at some point you get more Fell Witches involved, and it's a lot. And the war beasts are nice too. So you have the relationships. I'm trying not to give too much away. But I think it's really well written, and it is a fresh perspective to a fantasy world. Like, it doesn't feel like it feels like it's not something I've read before. Like, it's something unique. It's not let's say it's not something, as I was saying earlier, that I wanted to read something completely crazy. It's not that, but it takes what we normally would expect in a high epic fantasy and it gives it a twist that makes it feel, it makes, oh geez, it makes it feel like it's something new. Um and I don't know if it's because it's such a big fantasy, but you really get to know the characters. And I mean, part of it is because it's like a 3 book, and each book has like more than 500 pages. So you do have the time to get to know all these characters. But I also think the writing has a bit to do with it. Like, you're interested in all of the characters, at least I was. And I didn't feel like there was, well, from the main cast, sure, they're all flawed, of course. That's the other thing I liked about this. They all had flaws. None of them were perfect. But you like all of them in to some degree, or you at least, even if you don't like them, you at least understand their motivations and why they're doing things. And then there's some other characters that are more cast as villains, more stereotypically as villains, but even those characters are nuanced. So I think that's why it works. And the war scenes, because I'm not someone who likes to read pages upon pages and pages of battle scenes. There were battle scenes in here, but I do think they were well spaced out. I didn't feel like I was reading battle scenes every single time. And I can't really say much about the quality of the battle scenes other than that, because I don't think I've read enough battle scenes. And to be honest, I shouldn't do this, but a lot of the time when there is a battle scene, I read the words of like, oh, I stabbed this guy and I don't know, turned and kicked this guy in the face or whatever. But in my brain, I don't really take enough time to fully process what that would look like in scene, because I have difficulty picturing stuff like that in my brain. I mean, I'm sure I could do it if I like really tried, but I also I get the gist of it. Like, I don't need to visualize the exact angle the knife went in, like so I can't really judge the writing of those scenes, but I did enjoy. I mean, I did feel like they were good, but I'm not the best person to ask how good they were. But yeah, but in conclusion, I will for sure read anything else Jen Williams has written. So I know she has another trilogy that came out before this one, which I will get to eventually. And I know she has another duology that's more recent. And her latest release is a YA fantasy, and I think it's even being marketed as a romantasy. And I'm going to be very honest and say that I'm very scared to read that one. But I probably will, especially if I will read the trilogy and the duology first, and like not sequentially, because I don't want like to read the same author over and over and over again without a break, because then I feel like, because it's the same writing style, theoretically their worlds kind of blend together, and then I don't appreciate the books as much as I would have if I had spaced them out. So by the time I have to make a decision if I'm gonna read the new romantasy, it's gonna be at least a year, because it just came out, so there's no paperback edition, and I don't want to buy it in hardback. So if the other books are good and I like them as much, I will probably read it just to see. But yeah, so that was all the books I read this month, or attempted to read, if we add the 2 that I started or continued, or whatever you want to call it. So it's pretty good, I think. I mean, it's not pretty good progress for this reading challenge, but for my standard of reading in the last few months, it is good amount. And it is more than September, which is perfectly understandable, because September I was all over the place. But yeah, what is this pen? This is not the pen I want. Okay, so I'm going to now scoot this camera down. Okay, I don't know how to do this exactly, so I'm just gonna hold it up. So, first things first, the October Man, I actually don't think goes anywhere, because I read this before I decided I was gonna start this challenge. Scuttler's Cove, I am using for a book published in 2025, so I'm just gonna write that in real quick. There's that. Then this one I also bought before I started the challenge, but it worked out because, oh, I forgot there's also this cover art. Also, this was independently published before it was traditionally published, in case you were wondering. Okay, but it does have a map, so it does work for the book with a map challenge, which, where is it? So there we go. And then we have the Black Tongue Thief, which I'm using because it has chapter titles, so we're using it for the prompt, a book with chapter names. Okay, and then we have Perfume, which I also already wrote. And that works for a book that shares its title with a song. So, from the books I read in October, 4 of them worked for this challenge. Oh, actually, no, that's wrong. I put the Poison Song also for a book with a green and white cover. If you disagree, please let me know in the comments, because I'm using my best judgment. And then technically the other 2 books I started, so this one and where is it there? The red one there is Once Upon a Tome. Both would work for this challenge. So now let's talk really briefly about if I stick to my TBR rules. So I had 3 guidelines for myself for reading. One of them is that, the first one is that I have to read the book I get through my subscription in the month I get it, and I unfortunately have not. So it's back there. It's called The Great One. It's not focusing on the books really. There we go. The Great One. I will get to it. It's just, it felt very close in vibes to the Rivers of London series, because it is set in London and it does involve people who practice magic. So I just wanted to give it enough space to read, but I will for sure read it soon once I'm done with these 2 books and the other book I just started. I will get to that soon. It will for sure be read in November, because I have to, because I am also using it for a prompt. And I am very much interested in it. It's just I felt I needed some space thematically from the other books before I got to that. So yeah, then the second one was that I'm allowed to go and browse at the bookstore and buy 1 book a month, and I did use it for a fellowship of Bakers and Magic. Was it the best decision to spend my money on? No. But when I went book shopping, I really wanted something with this vibe. So that's what we did. And then the third one is to read 1 book off my physical TBR, which we more than succeeded in, because this was on my physical TBR, this was on my physical TBR, and this was on my physical TBR. So I did in fact read 3 this month. So that's great. So 3 down and 7 to go before I can buy myself buy myself new books. So I'm not sure if I mentioned, but in my TBR video, but the plan is that for every 10 books I read off my physical TBR, I can buy 5 new ones. So in that way, A, I don't have a stagnant TBR, and B, in theory, I should have less books on the TBR because I'm only replacing them with half of what I already got rid of. Practically, I'll probably end the year with a lot more books, because I'm not going to get rid of all the books I have read, and I am still buying new books with the subscription and the series I'm reading, and the 1 book a month that I don't know if I'm going to keep or not yet. So practically speaking, I'm probably going to end up having to move more books than I started, but I'm hoping that the read to unread ratio of those books will be higher, so that I have more actually read books than unread books this time around, next time I move. So yeah, so let's see. Hopefully November will be better. But yeah, if you have read any of these books and have any thoughts, or if you have any recommendations for crazy fantasies or anything of the sort, please feel free to let me know in the comments. Also, please feel free to let me know if you agree or disagree, or if you think that the book I chose for a certain prompt is not adequate. So yeah, so anyway, until next time, happy reading.